Hello and welcome to the Expression series of podcasts as part of the Scottish Mental Health Arts and Film Festival with me, Nicole Bell. This series examines different forms of artistic expression and the contribution they make to the representation and discussion of mental health. Today we'll be examining film, specifically the film Still Alice, and its role as a platform for the representation of dementia. I'm joined today by Dr. Maggie Ellis, a Fellow in Dementia Care in the School of Psychology and Neuroscience at the University of St Andrews. Thank you for joining me today, Maggie.
Pleasure.
Firstly, I'd like to ask you how you think Still Alice represents dementia in comparison to other popular films. For example, The Notebook deals with dementia.
Although I don't think Still Alice is perfect, I think there are some parts of it that I identified as maybe not exactly representative of what happens to people with dementia. I think it's a really vast improvement on some of the films I've seen before, specifically The Notebook, which is, total Hollywood.
Yeah, it's very romanticised and in and out.
It is, yeah, and the lady in the film The Notebook sort of comes in and out of her dementia, and some days she's fine, and all of a sudden she'll remember who everyone is, and oh, I'm so sorry, I forgot you all, and then the next second she's back to forgetting everyone and then lashing out madly, and it's not exactly an accurate representation. It's very dramatised and very much written for Hollywood, and I did feel that Still Alice, although as I said not perfect, it's much more realistic representation of what it might be like to have dementia, specifically young onset dementia, which works really quickly. I did think it was actually quite good, and sort of told the story quite well. It was quite sympathetic to all the characters, even her husband, who ends up kind of leaving her. You understand, I think, what he's going through in the movie. So yeah, I do think it's a much better representation of anything I've seen before.
And it's kind of nice that the other characters, the familial characters, if you like, they're not held up as totally heroic, which often you do see in films as well. I thought that was an interesting point.
Yeah, me too. You do see it is much more realistic in things like than The Notebook, for example. Her husband was completely devoted to her 24 hours a day and coming into her and reading to her, I believe I can beat this. Whereas in Still Alice, people are more accepting of the diagnosis and what's happening to their mum and their wife. And you do get to see sort of the dark side of some people's characters. Yeah. So, our older daughter is quite short with her, loses her temper with her. The husband is, he ends up leaving her to go and pursue his own career. You do see the negative sides of the family members and how it impacts on them, and those things do happen. Yeah. No one is saintly.
So now we're sort of getting on to the social impact of things.
Yeah.
So in Still Alice, the social impact is represented quite differently to that in The Notebook.
Yeah.
What do you think of how Still Alice treats the social impact of a diagnosis of dementia?
I think it does this really well. We see Alice starting to lose her words. Says me trying to find words to describe it. She starts off losing her words during a talk, and she masks this by cracking a joke. So she says she forgets the word lexicon, which I'm glad I just remembered. She forgets the word lexicon, and she searches and searches for it, and then makes a joke in the middle of the talk and says, I'm really glad I didn't have that glass of champagne, or I shouldn't have had that glass of champagne, and everyone laughs and it diffuses the situation. And that's a great example of how people with dementia, especially in earlier stages, are very, very cleverly able to cover things up. I think the neurologist later on says in the film that people can avoid going to see about their memory problems for a long, long time, because they come up with these really inventive and intelligent ways of covering up their problems, of masking them so that other people don't see, and that they're perfectly aware there's something not quite right, but I'm also perfectly aware that once they say those words, I think there's something wrong with me, then everyone around them will change. And I think we see that in the film. When she gets the diagnosis, then people around her do change. But I think it's the way we see her change socially is I think that's done really very well. And that we see her search for words to begin with, and then once people realise that there's something not quite right and she does get a diagnosis, then the people around her change, and she doesn't change that quickly, but because she has that label and that diagnosis, then her family members start to treat her differently. They start to talk over her. At the table there's a scene where people are talking about her while she's there. That happens throughout the film. And then we see her change from someone who's able to have a conversation quite easily to someone who is really struggling to find words to anchor herself in a conversation. Then we see her at her daughter's play, and she doesn't recognise her daughter, and she's able to sort of laugh that off as well and joke about that. But we do see her change. Towards the end of the film, we see her really, her social skills are really starting to change, and it's not just the people around her. She really is losing her ability to hold conversations. But I think the last scene where her daughter is reading a scene from a play that she's performing to her mum. It's just the two of them sitting together, and Alice looks kind of lost while she's listening to this, and at the end of it her daughter says to her, what is this about, Mum? What do you think this is about? And she struggles to find words, and she says it's about love. And I thought that was really poignant, because it shows, yes, she is losing her social skills, and she's losing the ability to voice her opinions, but what she isn't losing is the ability to recognise emotions and to feel emotions, and to be able to be in the moment and express those. And I think that last scene, it's called Still Alice, and that last scene shows that she is still Alice. And what we're seeing in the film is that, yes, she is losing her skills, but maybe we should think about it as maybe those social skills are becoming masked rather than lost, and therefore it's our job, like her daughter in the last scene is able to draw those out, it's our job to be able to recognise those and find some way of working with her that is best placed for her to be able to express herself.
So moving kind of away from the social aspect, one thing that she kind of uses to support her in this sort of journey of loss, if you like, of the social skills, is her smartphone. We see her use her smartphone on a daily basis. Do you think in the real world technology can be used to support somebody with a diagnosis in that way, or is that misrepresented in the film?
I don't think it's for everyone. In my own experience, I worked with a gentleman with dementia, and he also had early onset. But before he was diagnosed, he was very au fait with technology. He was great. He used to make his own greetings cards on his PC and everything. He was just really good with technology, and he kind of lost his confidence a bit. But once he and I started to work together, he really got interested in technology again, and took to an iPhone. He saw my iPhone and he wanted one, and his wife bought him one, and we worked through it together, and he just ran with it. So first thing he did was downloaded a journal app, which meant that he could take a note of everything that was happening every day. He would put in all his appointments, all his travel arrangements. He also used his smartphone to sort of anchor himself spatially. So if he had gone outside and felt a bit lost, then he could just look at his phone and tell where he was. So the sat-nav part of his phone was really useful for him. Also, his wife would be able to tell where he was when he was outside. He used it for absolutely everything, and not just things like being able to aid his memory, so sort of remind him of things that he needed to do or places he needed to be. It also helped him to maintain social connections. So he would email people, he would text people, he joined Facebook, and he used Facebook on his phone, on his smartphone all the time. So he would be in touch with relatives in Australia, while he was out on a day trip in Glasgow, and he just loved it. It really, in his words, gave him a new lease of life.
Yeah.
Was I don't think everyone would be that accepting of it. I mean, I know older people who don't have a diagnosis of dementia who would be just absolutely terrified to be given a smartphone, be overwhelmed by the idea of it. But it is possible, and certainly for this gentleman, technology really opened up his life to all these different opportunities that he wouldn't have had before. Before he had this tiny little smartphone, it gave him so much.
And to think that he didn't have one before, but then it sort of became an adaptation for him. That's really great that he can pick that up.
Yeah.
And I think it's sometimes when we think about dementia, we forget that you can pick up these new things. Not always, not every time, but there is that window of hope sort of in that.
Absolutely, and it also shows that we don't always need specifically tailored technology, so sort of gigantic phones with huge buttons and really, really loud rings and things that you sometimes see for older people. You don't necessarily need those adaptations. If you can take a piece of technology that we all use and find some function of it that is useful for that individual, then we can use what's already out there.
No, it's great. It's great. So we're sort of coming to the end here now. So to sum up, we kind of touched on this earlier, but the film is titled Still Alice. Do you think that's an apt title for the film, and why?
I think it's a great title. I love the title because it really does highlight the fact that we all need to remember that no matter what stage of dementia a person is living in or experiencing, that person is still the person they have always been. And some parts of them may be concealed or hidden because they are struggling with social skills, or they're struggling with finding their words or their memory, or whatever problems they're having. It's important for us to remember that person is still the person they always were. And that it really is up to us. It really is up to us to help to bring those characteristics out, to find some way of communicating with people with dementia or working with them that allows them to be themselves at no matter what stage of dementia they're at. I mean, Alice was still Alice right at the very later stages when she was able to express emotion. It was still her. And I love that title. I think the title is one of the best things about the film. I think it's a great message to take away.
Dr. Maggie Ellis, thank you very much for joining me.
Pleasure. Thank you, Nicole.